Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. Right now, we are studying the four Gospels in chronological order, and looking at these. We just finished the Sermon on the Mount, which was Matthew 5, chapters 5 through 7, and so now we're outside of that, and we're looking at this. And today we're looking at a Roman officer demonstrating faith. And it says here when Jesus had returned from Capernaum, he was from where he was preaching the Sermon on the Mount. A Roman officer came and pleaded with him, "Lord, my young servant lies in bed and is paralyzed and is in terrible pain." So it's interesting. He's pleading for his servant to be healed, and Jesus said, "I will come and heal him." But the officer said, and this is an interesting fact here, "I'm not worthy to have you come to my house. Just say the word, and you are where you are, and my servant will be blessed. I know this because I'm under authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go, and or come, and they come. And I say to my slaves, do this, and they do it." And so it's an interesting exchange here, because this is kind of the first time we've seen anything like this, where you know someone comes to Jesus and says, "Hey, heal someone far distance off," but at the same time, asking for it to say, "Hey, I don't need you to come here. I know you can do it from far away." So I mean, just the crazy. I mean, it's just really a great amount of faith that this person has that Jesus hadn't seen before. And so he says, like, he sees this, and he was amazed, right? He was amazed, and we're gonna look at the Greek meaning for this amazed. It's not like he was surprised, like not in like a surprise or shock, or like he didn't know. It was such an amazement. It was an admiration for this faith that this guy had. And so he turns to those who are following me, says, "I tell you the truth, I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel." Right? And so he's talking to the Jewish people, and this Roman would have been a Gentile, right? He wasn't an Israelite. He wasn't Jewish. He was a Roman soldier, and he was a captor at that of the Jewish people. And so not only is Jesus turning around saying, "Hey, look, I haven't seen faith like this," it's insulting to them, because he's sitting there saying, "Look, this guy who wasn't even raised in the same faith as you to observe God like me, I've seen more faith from him than I have any of you all." And so it was just shocking to them. He says, "I tell you this, that many Gentiles," and this is where it really, would have rubbed the Jews the wrong way. "I tell you the truth, that many Gentiles will come over all over the world from east and west and sit down," and here's where he adds insult to injury, "with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and feast in the kingdom of heaven." So I mean, he's sitting there saying, "Look, these Gentiles are going to come and be in the kingdom of heaven and feast with Abraham and Isaac." And that would have been extremely insulting to the Jewish people for someone to suggest that. But then he goes even further and says, "Look, many Israelites, those for whom the kingdom was prepared, will be thrown into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And then he tells the Roman officer to go back home because you believe it has happened, right? And that young servant was healed at the same hour. I mean, just amazing faith from this Roman officer. And Jesus calls it out and lets him know. And so, just to give you a little bit of background and history here, the Roman officer was called a centurion, right? And a centurion was a career military officer, right? In the Roman military, and he would have been over 100 soldiers. That's why it was called a centurion. They were hated by the Jews, all right, because they were their oppressors. They had come in and taken over, and then also he was a Gentile. So it put and what's funny is they put their faith, the other faith, the same. It put the Jews that were there, their faith the same. And he was talking to some of his disciples when he said this too. And he told the crowd that many religious Jews who should be in the kingdom would be excluded. Right? He was letting them know, look, you're not going to be there. Some of you are not going to be there, which would have not been, they had followed all the rules, they had followed all the traditions, right? They had followed everything, so they were going because they checked every box, so they get to go to heaven. And he's letting them know that's not the way it works. Right? Just because you check boxes doesn't mean you're going to, be in heaven one day. And so we've got to understand that. We've talked about that a little bit like yesterday with the fruits of the, well, not the fruits of the Spirit, but the fruits, right? Our fruits, right? And what shows. And he's saying, look, there's a lot more to it than obeying a bunch of rules. And anyone can check boxes. Checking boxes is easy, right? Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I grew up in the church, right? And I saw a lot of people, and I've seen a lot of people who it's very easy to check a box, come and do it, check a box, and leave, right? But it's hard to show true faith. It's very hard to show true faith, and this is what Jesus is calling out here. And so he tells them this, and this also, right, this passage, right, marks a turning point, especially in Luke's account, right, where it's at, of Jesus' ministry. Up to this point, he's dealt exclusively with the Jews, right? Here, he begins to include the Gentiles. He starts including them in his ministry, and he starts showing them, that, hey, the gospel, my message that I'm coming with, is going to be for everyone, not just the Jews. It's going to be for the Gentiles as well. And so that was a really good term. And so you notice that the main characters, right, in this little short little drama, that plays out here, is you have the Jewish elders, you have a Roman officer, and you have an officer would have been a slave or servant, more than likely would have been probably the more appropriate term here. There's very different racial and religious backgrounds amongst all these people, and vastly different standings on the social ladder, right? So you had officers and you had Jewish leaders, and then you would have had a servant, right? And all these people in all this. And so Jesus breaks through all these barriers. It's a wonderful thing about Christianity when done right. When following Jesus done right, it breaks through all kinds of barriers. And I've seen this, and if you haven't seen this, I'm sorry, but it does. And it brings people from all social economic backgrounds together to be as one. And we saw this in the early church, right? You literally in the early church, you had master and slave worshiping side by side, right? And so that today may not make a lot of sense to us, right? But back then, that was an extraordinary thing. I mean, if it was happening today, it would be an extraordinary thing. Luckily, we're not dealing with that kind of stuff today. But Jesus and following Jesus done right breaks through all kinds of barriers. And so Matthew 8 verse 5 says that the Roman officer visited Jesus himself. Luke's account, I didn't read this. I'm just going through Matthew with this one. Luke's account says he sent Jewish elders to present his request to Jesus, right? And so there's a thing we need to understand, because a lot of people think, well, that look, their stories don't match. There's a conflict in the Bible. The thing we need to understand in those days, right? If someone sent a messenger, it was the same. It was considered the same thing as dealing with that person directly, right? So that would be like if a king or a leader sent a messenger, you treated that messenger as if you were speaking to the king or the leader himself. And so that whenever people would write about that, this is the same thing. This is the same type of thing we look at, is that they wrote that he as if he was dealing with them, because in that day it was seen as dealing with him directly, even though if you sent a messenger. And so sometimes we don't understand stuff like that, and so we'll see differences in the writings, like, oh well, there's contradictions in the Bible. It's like, no, we just need to understand the norms and the customs of that day, so we don't end up with confusion and stuff like that. So just wanted to put that out there. So the Roman officer didn't come to Jesus, and he didn't expect Jesus to come to him. That's the his faith was so strong, but also his military background gave him this. Just as the officer didn't have to be present, right? If he gave an order, he sent someone with that order. He didn't have to be there for that order to be fulfilled, and he understood Jesus could do the same thing. Jesus could say, "Be healed," and it didn't matter if he was 2 feet away from him or 10 miles away from him. Then the person will be healed. And so the officer's faith was just especially amazing, because he was a Gentile and he had not been brought up, in the same sort of loving God environment that that the Jewish people have, and more likely he was brought up under Roman type, gods that you see. And so it's just Jesus. It says there in verse 10 that Jesus was amazed, right? And I put the Greek word in there for me. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. I'm horrible at pronouncing Greek words. But it means to wonder, like to admire, have an admiration, marvel, or wonder, right? And so Jesus saw this, and he just admired this man's great faith, because it was greater faith than what he was seeing from his Jewish, the Jewish people that he was there talking to first, for the most part, and the ones who were following him around trying to catch him in things, who didn't believe in him. but this Roman officer who had no upbringing, no background in the Jewish religion, had more faith in Jesus than those who should have been looking for Jesus and recognize him did. And so Jesus calls him out, and he takes chances, and he takes turns calling him out whenever he finds stuff like that, and he's doing it to show them who they need to be. But there are really a lot of them that don't ever get it. And so it's an amazing little story there in the Bible that we have of seeing someone's faith and what great faith can do. And we need to try to follow this man's example, this soldier's example of having the faith to ask Jesus to do something and it be taken care of. And so, like we said, it was not always, we talked about in the asking, seeking, and knocking. He's not always going to give us what we want, but he is going to make sure we have our needs taken care of and that we get what we need. So again, I appreciate you for watching them to the end. I appreciate those who have been sharing these. If you feel like it's something that's beneficial to someone, please share it with them. There's many ways and social media ways and emails and all that, the way you can share it. And if you hadn't subscribed to our channel, please take the time to subscribe. We're going to continue to push out content like this. And as always, thank you for watching.